Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. Today, Zach and Tori Roloff's house caught fire. Zach Roloff's condition is very critical. She was admitted to the hospital. I will explain everything. The story takes a turn no one could have ever predicted. A turn so devastating, so sudden that it has left family, friends, and millions of fans around the world in a state of shock and disbelief. Today, we are not here to talk about a television show. We are here to talk about a tragedy, a fire that has consumed a home and a life that hangs precariously in the balance. This is the story of the day the Roloffs' world, and the world of everyone who loves them, was shattered. September 27, 2025, began like any other day in the Roloff household in Battleground, Washington. For Zach and Tori, life after Little People, Big World was a new chapter they had embraced with open arms. Their stunning custom-built home, a testament to their hard work, and a sanctuary for their three beautiful children, Jackson, Leela, and Joa, was a world away from the constant cameras and public scrutiny of the farm. It was their private paradise, a place where they could simply be a family. Tori, ever the loving chronicler of their lives, had shared snippets of their blissful existence with her millions of followers. Just a day before, she had posted a video of Jackson, now a confident and curious 7-year-old, teaching his younger sister, Leela, how to build a Lego castle. Zach could be heard in the background, laughing, his voice a warm and familiar presence. It was a picture of domestic tranquility, a portrait of a family living their dream. Their neighbor, Sarah Jenkins, recalls seeing Zach that very morning. He was out on his lawn bright and early. He always is, meticulous about his yard. He waved, gave that big, friendly smile of his. When asked how the family was, he just beamed and said, "Couldn't be better, Sarah, just soaking it all in." Those were his words, soaking it all in. It's hard to believe that only a few hours later, everything would be gone. As the day wore on, a change began to creep into the idyllic summer atmosphere. A heat wave, which had been blanketing the Pacific Northwest for days, reached its peak. Temperatures soared to record highs, and a dry, gusty wind began to pick up, rattling windows and whipping through the tall pine trees that surrounded the Roloff property. It was the kind of day that makes you feel on edge, the kind of day where the air itself seems to buzz with a nervous energy. Inside the Roloff home, the family was taking refuge from the oppressive heat. Tori would later tell investigators that she had been feeling uneasy all afternoon. A mother's intuition, perhaps, or just the unsettling nature of the weather. She had busied herself with the kids, trying to keep them entertained indoors. Zach, ever the handyman, was in the garage. He had been working on a project for the past few weeks, a custom-built playhouse for the children. A miniature version of the iconic pirate ship from Roloff Farms. It was a labor of love, a piece of his own childhood that he wanted to pass down to his kids. The garage, a spacious 3-car structure attached to the main house, was his domain. It was filled with tools, lumber, and the scent of sawdust. It was also, unbeknownst to anyone, the place where the perfect storm of circumstances was about to converge with catastrophic consequences. The Clark County Fire Department's preliminary report would later point to a tragic and almost mundane series of events. The combination of the extreme heat and an overloaded electrical circuit powering Zach's tools and the dry, gusty, windy conditions created a tinderbox environment. All it took was a single spark. It happened in the blink of an eye. One moment the garage was a sanctuary of creativity. The next, it was the epicenter of a raging inferno. The fire, fed by the dry wood of the Playhouse project and fanned by the relentless winds, exploded with a terrifying ferocity. Tori was in the living room with the children. She heard a loud pop followed by a strange sizzling sound. Then the power flickered and died. The smoke detector's shrill cry began to scream. Her first thought was for her children. Her second thought was for her husband. Timeline. At 4:15 p.m., a neighbor reported hearing a loud bang from the direction of the Roloff property. At 4:17 p.m., Tori Roloff made a frantic 911 call. Her voice was barely audible over the sound of chaos in the background. Tori's voice trembled as she held the phone tightly against her ear, her other arm wrapped protectively around the children who clung to her side. The operator on the other end struggled to make out her words over the deafening roar of chaos that filled the roll-off property. Crackling flames, bursting glass, and the shriek of smoke detectors drowned nearly every syllable. All I could hear, the dispatcher would later recall, was a woman's panicked voice, children screaming in the background, and the sound of something burning, fast. The clock was ticking. In house fires, every second is a battlefield between survival and disaster. Inside the garage, Zach had been working only moments earlier. The inferno now raging through the structure left no doubt he was trapped. Tori's fear wasn't just for herself and the children, it was for her husband. Neighbors later said they saw smoke billowing from the roll-off property before the fire engines even arrived. The sky above battleground Washington turned a sickly orange as flames leapt high, fed by the relentless wind that had scoured the Pacific Northwest all week. Sarah Jenkins, the neighbor who had chatted with Zach earlier that morning, was one of the first to notice. She sprinted barefoot across her lawn, phone in hand, tears streaking her face. "I couldn't believe it," she said. "I had just seen him. He was smiling, and now this." By the time the first fire engine screamed down the road, thick black smoke was curling upward in violent plumes. The heat radiated so fiercely that even standing 100 feet away felt unbearable. Tori managed to shepherd the children outside, pressing them close against her as they stood on the edge of the yard, coughing and crying. She could feel the sting of hot ash landing on her skin. Her heart pounded with the terrifying realization Zach was still inside. The firefighters rushed in with practiced precision. Their boots pounded against the gravel, their shouted orders cutting through the chaos. They knew they weren't just dealing with a burning garage. This was a family home, a beloved landmark in the community. Captain Ramirez of the Clark County Fire Department took immediate command. "Garage fire, possible entrapment," he barked into his radio. "Full suppression, search and rescue priority." 2 firefighters, masked and armored against the inferno, disappeared into the smoke-choked structure. The world outside seemed to hold its breath. Minutes felt like hours. Tori clutched her children, whispering prayers she barely remembered forming. The children cried for their father, their voices piercing the nightmarish soundscape of crackling flames and sirens. Finally, through the swirling smoke, figures emerged. The firefighters carried a man, Zach Roloff. His face was blackened with soot, his body limp, but he was alive. Barely. Tori's scream of relief and anguish split the air. She rushed forward, but a paramedic caught her, guiding her back so they could work. "We need space," the medic insisted, already beginning CPR. Zach had no pulse. The children clung to their mother's skirts, sobbing as they watched strangers fight to bring their father back. The medics worked with grim determination, compressions, breaths, defibrillator pads slapped onto his chest. "Clear!" The jolt of electricity sent his body arching upward, then crashing back down. Once, twice, 3 times. A faint rhythm returned. It wasn't strong, but it was something. Zach Roloff had a heartbeat again. The medics wasted no time. They loaded him onto a stretcher, his body shaking from the trauma, his clothes charred and clinging to his skin. Oxygen masks, IV lines, and bandages covered him. Tori followed the ambulance as it roared away, her car swerving recklessly behind it. Inside the vehicle, she kept whispering his name, as though sheer willpower could tether him to life. Back at the property, the fire raged on. The garage collapsed in a shower of sparks and ash, the children's nearly finished playhouse project reduced to smoldering ruin. Firefighters battled the blaze deep into the evening, preventing it from consuming the main house entirely, but the damage was done. The Roloff family home would never be the same. At Peace Health Southwest Medical Center, doctors and nurses rushed Zach into the emergency department. His lungs were scorched from smoke inhalation. Burns marred his arms and chest. His heartbeat was erratic, his blood pressure dangerously low. They intubated him, stabilized him, and transferred him to the ICU. The waiting room filled quickly. Friends, neighbors, and soon media crews gathered. The Roloffs were more than just a family. They were a symbol. For years, millions had followed their journey on television, watched their children grow, and shared in their triumphs and struggles. Now, those same fans waited anxiously for news, united in dread. Tori sat in a corner of the waiting room, her children asleep beside her, exhausted from shock. Her hands shook as she scrolled through her phone, messages flooding in, texts from Amy Roloff, from Matt, from siblings, from strangers who had seen early reports online. "I don't care about the cameras," she whispered to a friend who tried to comfort her. "I just want him to come home. I just want him to live." In the ICU, Zach lay still, machines doing the work his battered body could not. A ventilator hissed rhythmically, monitors beeped in the dim light, each sound both reassuring and terrifying. Doctors warned the family that the next 24 hours were critical. The Roloff family gathered by his bedside. Amy held her son's hand, her eyes red with tears. Matt stood silently, his face grim, the weight of a lifetime of memories pressing heavily on his shoulders. And outside the hospital, fans lit candles, whispered prayers, and held vigils, united by love for a family they had never met, but felt they knew. The ICU hummed with the quiet, relentless rhythm of machines. Monitors glowed in the dim light, casting eerie reflections on Zach's face. His chest rose and fell with the mechanical cadence of the ventilator, each breath a reminder that life was being sustained not by his own strength, but by the fragile balance of medicine and chance. Doctors spoke cautiously. Smoke inhalation was their greatest concern. Zach's lungs had been scorched by the heat and toxic fumes. His airways were inflamed, blistered, and vulnerable to collapse. The burns on his arms and chest, though painful and disfiguring, were treatable. The lungs, however, were another story. The next 24 hours, one physician explained gently, will determine whether he stabilizes or deteriorates. Tori sat rigid in the chair beside his bed, her fingers gripping his hand through layers of gauze. She whispered to him, as though he could hear, recounting memories of their life together, meeting at church, their wedding day, the births of their children. She told him the kids were safe. She promised him they would rebuild, no matter what. Outside the hospital, news vans lined the street. Reporters spoke into cameras, their voices urgent and dramatic. Former Little People Big World star Zach Roloff is in critical condition tonight following a devastating house fire at his battleground Washington home. His wife, Tori, and their 3 children escaped unharmed, but Zach remains in intensive care. The story spread quickly. Fans across the country and around the world took to social media. Hashtags trended within hours. Hashtag pray for Zach. Hashtag Roloff strong. Hashtag Little People Big World. Thousands posted messages of love and encouragement. Back at the fire scene, investigators combed through the wreckage. The Clark County Fire Department cordoned off the property, carefully documenting every charred beam, every twisted piece of metal. Captain Ramirez's team focused on the garage, the point of origin. Preliminary evidence matched the grim scenario they suspected. A combination of extreme heat, overloaded circuits from power tools, and the relentless wind had created a lethal recipe. Sawdust, dry wood, and solvents scattered around the workshop provided ample fuel. It had taken only a single spark. One investigator shook his head. This could have happened to anyone, but it's still tragic. Everything lined up perfectly for disaster. Neighbors gathered at the edge of the yellow tape, some holding flowers, others clasping their hands in silent prayer. Many had watched Zach grow up on television, navigating life as a little person with humor and determination. To see him now, fighting for his life, struck a chord deeper than simple sympathy. Inside the ICU, the Roloff family stood vigil. Amy paced the room, her maternal instincts battling against helplessness. Matt, usually the one with plans and solutions, looked utterly lost. Jeremy and Molly arrived, their faces pale with worry. Even distant relatives and old friends trickled in, offering quiet support. Tori barely moved from Zach's bedside. Nurses urged her to rest, but she shook her head. "If he wakes up, I need him to see me first. I need him to know he's not alone." At midnight, a nurse gently touched her shoulder. "She's stable, for now," she said softly. "You should try to get some sleep." But Tori couldn't. Every beep of the monitors jolted her nerves. Every hiss of the ventilator made her heart race. Sleep was impossible when the person you loved most in the world teetered on the edge of life and death. The children, too young to fully understand, had been taken home by Tori's sister for the night. Jackson, the oldest, had asked one heartbreaking question before leaving. "Is Daddy coming home tomorrow?" Tori could not bring herself to answer. By dawn, the hospital corridors buzzed with activity. Reporters tried to slip past security for updates. Vans crowded the lobby, some leaving handwritten cards and stuffed animals. A makeshift wall of prayers, photos, and candles grew outside the entrance, flickering in the early morning breeze. Inside, Zach showed faint signs of responsiveness. His eyelids fluttered, his fingers twitched around Tori's hand. The doctors warned it could be reflex, but Tori clung to hope. "That's him," she whispered. "He knows I'm here." Meanwhile, the fire department held a press conference. Captain Ramirez stood before microphones, his uniform still smelling faintly of smoke. At approximately 4:15 p.m. yesterday, our department responded to a structure fire at the Roloff residence. Upon arrival, we encountered heavy flames originating from the garage. One adult male was rescued in critical condition. The cause is under investigation, but preliminary findings indicate a combination of electrical overload and weather conditions. A reporter asked whether the fire was preventable. Ramirez's jaw tightened. Hindsight is always 2020. What I can tell you is that Mr. Roloff is alive because of the rapid response of our crew and the sheer luck that we got to him in time. Luck. That word echoed in Tori's mind as she replayed the scene again and again. The pop, the smoke, the frantic escape. If she had hesitated even a minute longer, if the fire trucks had been delayed, if the paramedics had given up after the second shock, Zach would already be gone. As the day wore on, messages poured in from everywhere. Former co-stars, producers, and celebrities sent prayers. Churches held vigils. Even strangers shared their own stories of survival, hoping to give the Roloff strength. By evening, Zach's condition remained critical but stable. Doctors explained that swelling in his lungs was still severe and infection was a constant threat. They had placed him in a medically induced coma to allow his body to heal. Tori sat by his bedside, reading messages aloud. "Listen to this, Zach," she whispered. "Someone from Texas says you inspired their son to never give up. A woman in New York says she's praying for our family every hour. You have no idea how many lives you've touched." She broke down. "So you have to keep fighting, okay? For me, for the kids, for all of us." That night, as rain finally swept across Battleground, dousing the last smoldering embers of the Roloff home, hope lingered in the hospital room. Fragile, precious, and desperately needed. Days blurred into nights, and nights back into days. In the ICU, time seemed to bend and collapse on itself. Every beep of the monitor became a heartbeat of the Roloff family's collective anxiety. Zach remained in his medically induced coma, the ventilator hissing rhythmically, a cruel reminder that his body was not yet capable of breathing on its own. For Tori, life outside that hospital room ceased to exist. She lived on coffee, prayer, and the fragile hope that each hour Zach survived meant one step closer to recovery. Nurses urged her to go home, to rest, but she refused. "If he wakes up," she said firmly, "I'll be right here. He'll need me." The children, shielded from the worst of it, stayed with relatives. Jackson, the eldest, began to ask questions that no 7-year-old should have to ask. "Why can't Daddy come home? Did I do something wrong?" Tori tried to reassure him, choking back tears. "Daddy's sick, sweetheart, but he's fighting, just like you fight when you fall and scrape your knee. Daddy's strong." Lila clung to her blanket, her wide eyes reflecting confusion more than fear. Little Josiah, too young to comprehend, cried often at night, missing the familiar presence of his father's voice. Amy Roloff, torn between wanting to be strong for her grandchildren and crumbling under the weight of seeing her son in such a state, stepped into the role of steady caretaker. Tori needs to be with Zach, she told friends. The least I can do is keep the kids safe and loved. Matt, meanwhile, wrestled silently with guilt. His own house, the farmhouse on Roloff Farms, had withstood countless storms and accidents over the years, but here, his son's brand new home had become a death trap. If only he'd been working on the farm instead, Matt muttered one evening, his voice cracking. Maybe none of this would have happened. By the third day, the fire investigators released their official report. The press conference was brief, but heavy. The fire originated in the garage, Captain Ramirez confirmed. The cause has been determined to be an electrical overload from power tools running simultaneously. High temperatures, low humidity, and strong winds accelerated the fire's spread. This was a tragic accident. Preventative measures such as updated wiring and surge protectors may have reduced the risk, but under these conditions, the outcome was almost inevitable. Those words, tragic accident, echoed through the media. Headlines across major outlets carried the story.